Good morning. If you got your Bibles, Proverbs chapter 30 is going to be the place where I think it makes the most sense for us to start today. So if you got a Bible, you want to pull that up. However you get there, Proverbs chapter 30 would be the right place to be. Scott's going to have some closing remarks. Like he said a few minutes ago, this is week 10, and this will be the end of, as far as we know, of drive-in church right now. Next week, we'll be back in the building for two separate identical services at 9 o'clock and at 10 o'clock, divided up by last name. We will still offer a drive-in option in our parking lots there at Main Street at the building, 2 miles that way. So we're going to be sending out more information about that this week. Email, text, our website is already updated with our plans. The most up-to-date info, honestly, is going to be on our Facebook page. And I know a lot of you are new to Main Street or, just kind of showed up to Parking Lot Church. And I don't know what your intentions are, but if they are continuing with us, our Facebook page is probably going to be the best way for you to get updated information about what we're doing and what we're trying to do. So 10 weeks ago, this is not part of the sermon, but 10 weeks ago, we were trying to figure out what are we doing here? We can't go to church as normal in our building. And so we were discussing all these different ideas. And Scott one Thursday morning had this idea. He texted me at like 6:30 a.m. and he said, let's do drive-in church. And I said, that's a dumb idea. I don't like it. And then over the course of the next couple days and weeks, I started to think this is really an exceptional idea. Now I'm regretting that. Now it's hot and it's almost June and I'm in the sun, but Scott's been the guy that has been behind the scenes working on this thing from day one. So if you would, you got a horn in front of you. I think we ought to tell him. There. Okay, that's plenty. That's good. Thanks. But also, there's Scott, and there's also, you've probably seen the same, sometimes smiling faces every time you've driven around this parking lot and gotten you parked. There have been the same guys over here and back there, and they're going to be the same guys that help us get out today. They hadn't missed a beat. So if you would, they hadn't had a whole lot of thank you yet. Anyway, so give them a little thank you too. Now, Proverbs chapter 30. All right, good. So I was thinking this week, there are a lot of small things in our world that make a huge difference in our lives. And we're going to talk about that from Proverbs 30 and a little bit later in the book of Matthew. But there are a lot of really tiny things that make a huge difference in our world, in our lives. And you may be thinking, well, that's not true. Only big things make a big difference. If that's the case, then you've never been in a small room with a mosquito, right? Then you know that a tiny little insect, I guess it's an insect, makes a huge difference in your world. Small thing, big difference. If you think it doesn't make sense, then you've never had a little tiny pebble in your shoe and you've had to walk around on that thing because you couldn't find a convenient spot to get it out. And you understand at that point that small things make a huge difference. Termites are tiny little things that make a huge difference in your life if they decide to make an appearance in your life. We were brainstorming these things and we were thinking there are all kinds of tiny little small minuscule things that make huge differences in our lives. Most of them are negative. But then I thought of little fun size Snickers. And those things make a really big difference in your life when you're hungry. And so I hadn't talked a whole lot about the small thing that has wrecked our world since we've been here. And that's been intentional. Since day one, I made an effort that we're not going to mention Corona. We're not going to mention a virus. We may talk about how our world has changed, but we're not going to talk about COVID-19. But here at the end of parking lot, drive-in church, I think we need to talk a little bit about the tiny 1.25 nanometer sphere that has changed our world. Not so much about it, but about how small things can make a huge difference. 12 weeks ago, we had no idea that this thing even existed. We had no idea what kind of mark it was going to leave on 2020 and on our lives. But 12 weeks later, we figured out that some small things can make a huge difference in our lives. Proverbs chapter 30, Solomon's one of the wisest to ever live, and he writes these words. He is the guy that was king of Israel, and he asks, or God says, whatever you want, I'm going to give it to you. And he could have asked for riches or wives or women in general. He could have asked for great wealth. He could have asked for power. But instead of all that, he said, I want to be wise. And so God gives him the ability to be very, very wise. He gives him wisdom. And so Solomon, at some point in his life, writes down the book that we call Proverbs. There are 31 chapters. He writes most of them. And that includes chapter 30, verse 24. And I want you to think about some of these words. He says, "Four things on earth are small, but they're exceedingly wise. They make a big difference. The ants are a people not strong, but they provide their food in the summer. The rock badgers are a people not mighty, but they make their homes in the cliffs. The locusts have no king, but all of them march in rank." And this is the one that I really found interesting this week. The lizard that you can take in your hands, yet it is in kings' palaces. And so I got in my mind this picture of Solomon in his palace. And it was, you can read about him reading or building his palace in scripture, and it's huge, it's massive. It took years and years, and who knows how much expense and how many resources to build. But I got this mental image of Solomon laid up in his king's chamber, and he looks up on the wall, and there's this tiny lizard. And if you think about the house that the king of the land lives in, it's not easy to infiltrate that. His house, his palace, would have had security guards. It would have had a perimeter. He lived in a city with walls and gates. He lived in a palace area with gates and fences. He had armed guards all over the place. And so you would think that Solomon's palace is a really secure, a safe place to be. But he looks on the wall and he says, "My guards, they can keep out foreign armies. They can keep angry enemies at bay, but they let the lizard in? It's a small thing, but it makes a pretty big difference in his life." And it reminds him that there are some small things that are really difficult to deal with sometimes. There are some small things that can make a really big dent in our lives. And so we've had to deal with one of these over the last 12 weeks. A really, really small thing, virus, that has changed our world as we know it. And this has become our new normal. This thing it takes like a billion of them to measure out to 1 meter. And it has totally changed how we approach life. Now, I think Jesus would teach us that God didn't cause that. It's not his plan to wreck what we do and how we live. But he would also teach us that even though God didn't cause it, God can use things like this to maybe wake us up. And so for the rest of our time this morning, just, 5 or 6 more minutes, I want us to think about maybe how God can use a very small thing to totally change us, to maybe show us where we need to make some decisions in our life. Maybe help us understand where we've been lacking and help us know how we can best move forward. In fact, this is going to be the launching lesson of a series that I'm calling Little Giants. And we're going to talk for the next few weeks, not in the parking lot anymore, but we're going to be talking about some really small things in life, maybe our thoughts or our words, and how they can make huge impacts in how we do life and how we live our lives. In just the last 10 or 12 weeks, maybe God has used this, not caused it, but maybe used it to stop us in our tracks and to remind us of our mortality and to maybe take our breath away with how soon things can change and maybe show us that we're not who we thought we were. And maybe we're not as prepared as we thought we were. Maybe we're not as secure and safe like Solomon in his king's chamber. Maybe we're looking and saying, there's some small things that make a huge difference in life. Sometimes for the negative, like a little small tiny virus, but sometimes they can be positive. It's shown us, it's reminded us that, we really don't know what the future is going to hold. That we can't sit here and say, well, in 5 years, this is what I think I'll be doing. Because sometimes God can come in and God can change whatever those plans may be. Small things can make a huge difference. Little giants that we've got to deal with in our lives. So with that, I want you to turn to Matthew's gospel. And this is one of the small things that Jesus talks about. It's in Matthew chapter 17. Matthew chapter 17. And he says this several times in his ministry, but it's a pretty stark reminder of how powerful our God is and how powerful the people of God can be whenever we put our trust in this God. So Jesus in Matthew chapter 17 is talking to folks, and he's got these people that come around him so often. They got hurts, and they've got mistakes in their lives, and some of them are unhealthy people. Some of them have demons, and some of them have seizures, all kinds of stuff. And they come to him, and often, most often, Jesus heals these folks. And so Jesus, in this time, he's got a boy with a demon, and the people bring the boy to Jesus, and Lord, have mercy on my son. He's got this demon, and Jesus uh, turns it around and makes a pretty stark lesson. Verse 17, he says, "Oh, faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why couldn't we cast it out? We've been following you, right? We thought that we could do just what you've done." And he says, "Because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of a mustard seed, you'll say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it'll move, and nothing will be impossible for you." And so Jesus, in John or Matthew chapter 17, he points to the power of faith. And we talk about faith sometimes and say, people have great faith, or people have really strong faith, or it's a powerful kind of faith, and they can approach life and even the most uncertain of circumstances, and they can go through difficult problems and trials of this world because their faith is so strong. And Jesus says, that's great, but if you just got a little bit of faith, that's one of those little giants in life. It's just a tiny little bit of faith. He says, the size of a mustard seed. I'd say, hey, maybe the size of a coronavirus. You got just a little bit of faith. Jesus says, you can change the world. And the reality that we're faced with is that it's not really the size of our faith that matters to Jesus. It never has been, and I don't think it ever will be. What matters to Jesus is the object of our faith. If I've got all the faith in the world in myself, then I can still fail, and I may not get anywhere. But if I have, Jesus says, just the smallest amount of faith in God, then I'm going to be able to get somewhere. Maybe one of the things that God has done here is to slow us down and to stop us in our tracks and to take our breath away and remind us that maybe we're not who we thought we were, and to show us what's really essential in our lives. And if you're making that list, I would guess that list now includes things like people, because we've been removed from people for so long now. We desire that. We long to be around folks again, right? That's why you're here. And I bet your list would include family, because for now, 3 months, some of us have been separated from our family members. We haven't been able to talk to them because some of them are at risk, maybe. And maybe you realize now the importance of the relationships in your family. Maybe what you realize is really important now is hope, because at times maybe you were thinking, does this ever end? Will my kids ever be able to get out of the house again? Do I ever get a little bit of silence? Maybe there's a hope that you realize is important now. Maybe you see the value of love, because we've seen a lot of people go at each other. We've seen a lot of people with differing opinions about a pandemic and about how our nation and how our communities should move forward. And we're all, maybe desiring different things. And so maybe you realize there's a need for at least us to love one another and find ways to get along. Or maybe, like Jesus says in Matthew 17, you realize what's essential here is a little bit of faith. Not the faith that says, hey, cheer up, it's going to get better. Not the faith that says, hey, it can't be too bad. But the faith that says, no matter what happens here, I still believe in this God that we serve. And I still trust him because he is a good God. I still trust him to do what is right. The power of faith is not in the size of it, but it's in the object of our faith. And Jesus says, if the object of your faith is me, if the object of your faith is God, then you're not going to be able to be stopped. Now, I got to tell you, this is a strange world right now. And these are difficult days. And for you, I totally understand that this may be in the middle of some terrible times. And you're wondering, how does this work? And maybe for you right now, I know there are varying degrees of nervousness and cautiousness about this. Maybe you're somebody that says, hey, I'm over this and I'm ready to get back to what's normal. Or maybe you're somebody that says, I'm just thinking this is too soon. I'm not sure we're ready to go and take these steps just yet. And so I realized that talking about a small little grain of faith during difficult days and terrible times may be tempted to fall on deaf ears. But I got to remind you, in the words of Jesus, that even a small amount of faith can still move mountains. It can still remove the mountain of fear. A small amount of faith in the God who loves us so much to send His Son to die for us can still move mountains of desperation and hopelessness, and depression. A small amount of faith, Jesus says, can move us from where we are afraid to where God wants us to be, fearless. Faith conquers fear. Faith drives out fear because it knows that there's still a God who loves us and cares for us and is doing what's best in our worlds. So at the end of the day, at the end of parking lot church, at the end of drive-in church, we've had to stay in our homes for a while. We've had to do things differently. We're not, we're here, but we can't get out of our cars right now. We're not supposed to anyway. But somehow we got to find a way to make sense of this. And the more I read, and the more I study, the more I think, the only way to make sense, the only way to move forwards is to say, this was a disruption. And these were difficult days at times. And whether it's because of business or because of relationships or whatever it is, these may have been some terrible times. But I'm reminded that God calls us to better thoughts than that. And I know Jesus, when I read His words, He says, look, you had to stay in your cars for a little while. You had to stay in your homes for a little while. You had to shut down your business for a little while. You had to close the doors of the church building for a little while. But just because you had to stay in homes and stay in cars and close some doors doesn't mean the world is over. It may have been a good thing. It may have been a wake-up call. We may look back in 5 years, 10 years, who knows, and say, I'm so glad this happened because it woke me up to what's real and what's important to people, to family, to love, to faith, to hope. And it rejuvenated me and made me want to live more dedicated life for the God that I serve. It may be the little things in life, the small things that don't seem like a whole lot in the face of a pandemic, that can totally change how we've been. When Jesus was nearing the end of His life, He sat down around a group of people that He loved behind closed doors. And He sat at that table and He had a little talk with them about something that was about to happen. Not a small thing this time, a huge ordeal. Something that was about to wreck their lives and change their worlds forever. And maybe we are a little bit closer right now to understanding what that may have been like for them. But as He gathered them around in that upper room, around that table, and as He took the bread and the cup, and as He talked to them about His death, He said, I want you to know that it's not always going to be this bad. Yes, I'm going to the cross. Yes, my body, which is symbolized by the bread we're going to consume together in a few minutes, this bread is going to be broken. And yes, my blood, symbolized by the cup in a few minutes, it's going to be poured out. But He said, I want you to do this. I want you to gather together as a people in maybe some strange ways right now. And I want you to do this. And every time you do this, you remember my death until I come again. Until I come again. Until I come again. In the middle of a very dark day, in the middle of some terrible times, Jesus says, I want you to remember, have a little bit of faith, that it's not always going to be like this. And so even today, as we separated by our cars, but together in this lot, as we take this bread and we take this cup, we remember that how difficult this day has been, how terrible these times have gotten, how strange this world is. Little things like faith, little things like hope are still little giants in our world because they can make a huge difference in our lives, in our outlooks, in our attitudes. A little bit of faith that says, yes, it can be dark, but it's going to be brighter. A little bit of hope that says, hey, it may be a difficult time right now, but I've got confidence in my God because I know that it won't always be this way. It's a little giant, really small. It doesn't seem like a whole lot right now. A little bit of faith, a little bit of hope, size of a mustard seed. But Jesus says it can totally change your world. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, we want to thank you today for giving us this day to live, this time together as your people. We thank you for our ability here to gather, to still be able to pour out our hearts in worship to you. And Father, we want to thank you today for the little giants in our life, the small things that make such a big difference. We thank you for giving us reason for hope. We want to thank you for showing us how to love one another. We want to thank you today, God, for giving us something to have faith in, someone to have faith in. And today, Father, as we close up our 10 weeks of drive-in church, and as we make a step back into something that's a bit more normal, we want to ask you today to let us not go back to normal, to not go back to lukewarm if that's what we were, to open our eyes before we enter those doors again next week, to see what we can be, to know what we can change to be better, to see some maybe tiny things in our minds, some things that we can do, some choices we can make that are going to help us to be better Christians, more in line with Jesus, and more of what you want us to be. Help us to see the power of small things. Help us to know the way to move forward, and give us wisdom for the decisions that we're going to make. It's in Jesus' name we pray today. Amen.